Hello, Think Liberty listeners. I am AJ Olding. Welcome to episode 4 of Tales from the Shire. Today I have for you the very first interview I recorded for this show. Tales from the Shire was actually unnamed at the time that I recorded this, and the narrative nature of this episode is a large part of why I later settled on the name that I did. On April 15th, 2013, the finish line of the Boston Marathon was bombed. 3 people died, hundreds more were injured. For many Americans, that day brought back similar feelings to 9/11. A sense of fear shook the nation. Calls for increased security and police presences in public spaces became more and more regular throughout the whole country, throughout the whole of the United States. Today, I sit down with Justin O'Donnell to revisit his experiences of that day. Justin was deployed as part of a military operation to provide security for the Boston Marathon. The bombing and the events of the next couple months shaped his current worldview in severe ways, and I think you're going to find them very interesting. In this interview, he and I dive into the nature of freedom and the nature of security. I hope you enjoy this one. I am extremely proud of this interview. Please enjoy. Hello. Welcome to the first episode of currently unnamed Libertarian podcast. I have with me Justin O'Donnell, and I want to do a bit of story time and talk to Justin about one of the events that helped turn him into a libertarian. I think it's really impactful. Do you want to set us up?
Sure. So for just another libertarian podcast without a name at this point, we'll go on and we'll talk. But the event, I first off, to set it up, I like to give a talk every once in a while whenever I'm traveling or whenever I'm meeting with new people, new libertarians, about outreach and how we can reach out to people, how we can grow the movement, and that personal stories of what has turned you into a libertarian are really the most impactful, because they don't come from a place of, I sat there and read Rothbard for an entire weekend and realized the taxes were evil. It's like, no, something profound happened to make you think and view the world in a different way. And Jim Bouchard, one of the people who was really influential when I first came into the libertarian movement, he was running for Congress in Maine at the time. He hosted a podcast called Crazy Angry Libertarian, wrote a book by the same name, but in his book, he kind of distills down the philosophy that absolutely no one ever becomes a libertarian. That the libertarian school of thought isn't something that you just happen to decide one day that's what you're doing. It's so fundamentally different from everything that we see in mainstream media that the people who come to the libertarian school of thought, it's more like you had something happen to you one day where you realized you always were a libertarian.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience in my own life, and it actually revolves around the exact same event as yours does, and it's the Boston Marathon bombing that happened several years ago at this point in time. And I was wondering, can you tell us what led you to be at that event on that particular day?
Actually, yeah, that was near the end of my career in the Army. I was serving the Massachusetts National Guard. And want to do while I was finishing up my college at the same time. I often had weekends and holidays off, and what better way to spend your Patriots Day weekend than to get paid to hang out at the biggest party in Boston of the year.
Aside from St. Patrick's Day.
Well, St. Patrick's Day has gone downhill in Boston.
No one wants to be there for St. Patrick's Day anymore.
But the Patriots Day Marathon Day was always the biggest party. It was a wicked fun day, and it was an event that I had volunteered for year after year after year with the National Guard. We did the security detachment, and nothing had changed. Historically, what it was is you show up, you're on the barriers, the checkpoints, you have a great day, you're there to be a scene because people want to see people in uniform doing security, and the entire time college kids are handing you free drinks, and you get invited to a kegger after everything's over. It was a party. That's all anybody was there for. Then one year it was different. 1 year I remember how it started. We showed up on a bus from the Cambridge Armory, and we showed up to the police department in Wellesley 2 hours before we were supposed to be there. And I remember making a joke in the back of the bus. Well, shit, the National Guard showed up early for something. Something's going to go wrong.
That's pretty fucked.
Right. At the time, I thought it was funny. Everyone else thought it was hilarious because usually the governor waits until after a disaster to activate the National Guard.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty messed up. So can you talk about where you were at the time that the bombs actually went off, and like what kind of mindset you were in at the time that happened?
Yeah, so as we're going, we're just running the day. It's a checkpoint, simple checkpoint. I have 6 guys junior to me that I'm in charge of directly, and we're running 2 checkpoints and just basically making sure that nobody tries to hop the fence and jump into the middle of the marathon, which had never happened. In the years I'd been doing this and volunteering for this event, we had never seen anybody try and hop the fence and jump into the marathon or cause a ruckus and cause a problem. The marathon itself is a sacred tradition to the city of Boston and the people there. So it was more of just a show of force and a presence to be there as a patriotic symbolism, an event that, hey, the military's out here supporting the marathon. We were about 3 blocks from the finish line, and we're there all day, and it was near the end of the day. The crowd had actually started to disperse where we were. Everyone was more focused towards the actual finish line itself, because that's when the amateurs were starting to finish. Prizes were getting handed out. Sponsors were breaking down. It was nearing the end of the actual festivities when the bombs went off. When the bombs went off, I don't really think I can recall what my mindset was there other than, oh, this is different. And probably desensitivity. I was in the infantry. I spent my entire time in the Army training for actual combat operations where people were trying to blow us up.
Right.
And this just didn't seem out of the ordinary to me.
Had you seen combat before this event?
Not before that event.
No. Okay.
But it's you even through training. Now, I had seen several training accidents with larger explosions.
Right.
Than what had happened there. I'd been hospitalized by a training accident with a larger explosion than what happened at the Boston Marathon. And it just seemed as nothing that would kind of be outrageous. It didn't seem different to us. A lot of the junior guys that were with us were startled, had no clue what to do, no reaction. But then a lot of the senior guys, the guys who weren't doing security, but rather actually they marched in the marathon, the full 26 miles with 40-pound rucks, happened to be crossing the finish line as the bombs went off. And they were the ones they just jumped right into action. And what I'd imagine anybody with that training in that situation would have done, you don't think anymore, you just act.
Right.
And that's what my years of training in the Army infantry had been. You just don't think, you just act.
Right.
And it wasn't for a couple days after that I really had time to think.
Right. So then how quickly were you personally able to make it to the
me personally, the finish line, me and my guys, it took about 10 minutes after the first bomb.
Okay.
We actually made it to the finish line, at which point it was still complete and utter chaos. Nobody knew what was going on. Most of the EMTs there were just volunteer college kids, and they weren't trained for this kind of situation. But all things aside, it was an amazing response. Like anybody who had 10 minutes worth of medical training who was within a half mile just showed up to help. Finishers of the marathon got told as they were finishing, here's what happened. They need blood at these hospitals. They're all 3-4 blocks away. And after just having finished a freaking marathon, continued to run to the hospitals to donate blood. Mm-hmm. And I believe I saw a statistic somewhere just recently, actually, the Boston Marathon bombing is the only known mass casualty terrorist attack since 9/11 where not a single person, and this is globally, not United States, not Europe, this is globally, the only mass casualty terrorist attack in the world since 9/11 where every single person who made it to a hospital lived.
Wow. I mean, I think that speaks very highly of American hospitals. Not that that's what we're talking about.
Particularly Boston.
Boston is a hub of very
6 of the
good
top 10
hospitals.
hospitals in the world.
Right. It's right. I went to college in Cleveland where we have 2 of the top however many hospitals in the United States, and everyone thinks that's pretty nuts. Like, oh, the Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals are in the same place. No, Boston's on a different level.
Right. That's why so many Canadian politicians pay to come to Boston for their health care.
What? Okay.
No, going on, but it really wasn't for a couple of days afterwards till I was able to process everything. Didn't go home that night. We stayed in Boston for the next couple of days on the scene, which is really weird because I didn't pack.
Right.
None of us packed. This is not anything we had ever anticipated to run past 5 p.m.
Well, you don't pack for security theater.
Right.
Like,
I brought water and food to get basically knowing I had a 2-hour drive back to the Cape in traffic after.
right.
That it would be a long day, but nobody packed overnight stuff. Nobody packed. It got cold that night. I strictly remember that night after Patriots Day, it hit really, really cold temperatures on the Boston Common where
I'm
we
sure
were
it did.
staying. It's where we staged everything. We started within an hour of the bombs. We started herding people who weren't injured to the Boston Common for staging, and set up a pickup area where families could reunite and get each other and get the hell out of there. Mostly because a lot of the marathoners were finishing without phones, without any way to contact the people who were expecting to meet them there, and had all of their personal belongings that they dropped off in Hopkinton at the start of the race on a bus waiting for them at the Common. So
Right.
natural area to just stage everything. Plus, it was a good ways away from the finish line and from everything that was going on. But those couple days, we were sending National Guard troops, everyone we had on site, an entire battalion of infantrymen, to supplement Mass State Police, Mass Transit Police, and Boston Police with checkpoints and cordons all over the city. I strictly remember a full-bird colonel who assumed command after the bombing. He was not in command of the original security mission, and he walks over in civilian clothes, a suit. He happened to be our battalion commander, but he also happened to be on the board of the organization that ran the Boston Marathon. So he happened to be over there, and he just walks over and assumes command, starts issuing orders. And I remember one of the things he said was, "Stop and detain anybody who looks Muslim."
That sounds like a very American military thing to say.
Right. What caught me off guard is I never forgot that. And I also never forgot that there were 40 damn reporters within earshot, and I never saw that reported in any headline.
Yeah, I mean, reporters don't necessarily report every single thing that they hear. Yeah, I mean, like Andy Nagao, or however you pronounce his name, the guy out in Portland who's been covering the Proud Boys and Antifa, just got fired from whatever publication it was that he worked for because it came out that he didn't report on the Proud Boys planning some amount of violence, that it was later filmed and like it was like he was there when they were planning violence. Like,
Makes good stock footage for later.
Of course it does. Yeah.
The one distinct thing I remember was like a day and a half, 2 days later. I don't really remember how much time passed when we finally got relieved because, as I said, the governor waits 2 days to call the National Guard in any kind of emergency. In this case, from what I'm told and what friends of mine who weren't at the marathon told, there was no call made. People just started showing up at armories the moment the news went off.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And the kind of response that a citizen militia had, knowing that there was a possible attack and people didn't wait for orders. They just kind of went to fulfill a duty.
Right. So can we, all right, so let's fast forward a little bit after it. Like everything's calmed down. You're back on base or back home or wherever it is that you end up settling back down to. The guys are caught again. Now what's going through your mind at this point in time?
I'm literally watching news report a live shootout in Watertown, Massachusetts, and watching helicopters, news reporting, police going door to door, searching for this kid. Reports that they'd killed his brother in the shootout. and he was still at large. And then I don't even know what I was thinking other than good at that point.
Yeah.
At that point, like having seen the carnage, having seen what happened, having been in the immediate vicinity of the death and mayhem that he caused and seeing an immediate response, it was good.
Right. Okay. So let's fast forward again, because I've heard this story before, and I'm not skipping over, I don't think, anything overly important. Can we skip ahead to the next time you're going into Boston to do security detail?
Yeah. So the very next security mission every year, always following the Boston Marathon, was 4th of July. 4th of July, another one. Great party. You're on the checkpoint all day. You get invited to a kegger at some random college frat house afterwards. Nobody ever said no to 4th of July.
Right.
So there I was like, yeah, I'll do 4th of July. This will be great. Hung up on, I'm like, we're going to show a force this time. And like, we prepped. We started doing things we never did to prep for security missions before. Like making sure everyone had extra tourniquets packed.
Right.
Like making sure everyone had water and overnight supplies for a 6-hour mission. Like we learned our lesson, essentially. And it wasn't even thought of, oh, we learned a lesson. It's just like, all right, we're going to be prepared to deal with these fucks next time they happen. Not anything out of the realms of let's learn from what we did and how could we stop it. We kind of expected something else to happen. Right. And in the planning, you could see that it was expected something else to happen. I ended up being the most senior person from my unit that volunteered. So instead of being just in charge of 6 or 7 guys at a checkpoint, I ended up in charge of an entire freaking division of checkpoints. And I had about 45 privates and junior specialists under me who were running these checkpoints in coordination with the TSA, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, Massachusetts State Police, Massachusetts Transit Authority Police, Boston Police, Somerville Police, Quincy Police, Wellesley Police.
Like all of the
anybody
local,
in the greater metro Boston area sent over to
right.
police.
Watertown's there, Quincy's there, everyone.
SWAT vehicles. The FBI brought in mobile surveillance trucks, and these trucks look like pickup trucks with a generator in the back, but they pop up and the pole starts rising out of the generator up 60 feet with cameras on it. All running facial recognition software, total surveillance package. We had those like every few hundred yards throughout the fireworks area. Nobody was allowed onto the Esplanade because you had to go over 3 bridges, one of 3 bridges to get onto the Boston Esplanade. Nobody was allowed.
What is the Esplanade? I'm sorry.
The Esplanade is the big flat area. You know where the Hat Shell is? Hat Shell is where the Boston Pops Symphony Orchestra plays.
So this is a place where people typically watch fireworks from?
This is the place to watch the Boston 4th of July fireworks.
Okay.
Because the Boston Pop Symphony Orchestra plays a full hour show in conjunction with the fireworks.
Okay.
And the fireworks show is timed around their symphony.
Right. And no one was allowed to go into the normal spot.
No, people were allowed on there.
Oh.
But they had to go through a full search checkpoint.
Right.
Like everything. We emptied purses, going through no coolers, no backpacks, no purses over a certain size. And everything had to be searched, patted down. And then there was a set time where it was cut off. Nobody else on.
Can you talk a little bit about the size of the crowd compared to most years?
There was a newspaper headline the next day that said more soldiers than spectators watching the fireworks. We did not let many people on because it took so long to clear everyone through a military checkpoint into a TSA checkpoint into an FBI wanding. Okay, you're good to go.
Right.
I do remember clearly at about 8:30 p.m. when we shut it off, said nobody else on. I remember a family being separated. With kids on one side, because the parents put the kids ahead of them in line, and the parents on the other.
And there's no heart in the government, of course.
Oh, no. It took one TSA agent arguing with 3 FBI agents to let the kids come back off the Esplanade.
Oh, God.
But that was the level of extra security theater and force protection we brought out. But what's notably, the big event that sticks out to me that whole day was I had a fresh second lieutenant, had just graduated from college, just gotten his bars, hadn't even been to officer school yet, like post graduation of ROTC. Mm-hmm. And he was assigned as the guy in charge of this. And to this day, I'll say he's one of the best lieutenants I ever worked with, because the first thing he said is, "You're the senior enlisted person. What do I do?" He's like, "I have no clue what we're doing. What do I do?"
Asking advice is
right,
typically a good idea.
Right. And the only other officer I'd ever seen do that at the second lieutenant level was a former E7 Sergeant First Class Special Forces guy who decided to get commissioned, who came in and said, "I don't know your unit. Fill me in. Who can do what?"
Right. Okay.
But I was walking from checkpoint to checkpoint with him, one after another, just making sure the guys had water around lunch, get everyone food, rotate people in and out to make sure they got rest. It was like 150 goddamn degrees outside. And we're walking from one bridge to the next, and all of a sudden, I remember the landmark. It was one of the FBI surveillance vans. They had a big pole up with cameras, and some guy just pops down on a lawn chair in the middle of the sidewalk in front of us and just stops us from being able to walk past.
Right. And I assume the guy you're walking with is pretty furious about someone sitting down in the middle of the sidewalk.
Right, in this kind of a security zone. And my lieutenant just starts screaming at him, like, "You're impeding traffic. You can't do this. You need to move." And this guy's just ignoring him and reading a book. Mm-hmm. And after listening to my lieutenant yell for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, I just died laughing. And my lieutenant just looks at me. He's like, "What's so funny, O'Donnell?" I'm like, "He's reading 1984 by George Orwell." And I'm just dying laughing. And my lieutenant's like, "I don't get it." At which point I then had to explain to a college-educated second lieutenant in the United States Army the plot of George Orwell's 1984.
Right. They don't teach Orwell at the military academies.
And by the time I had finished explaining the plot, I just had the realization. I sat there, looked at the camera, looked at the guy, looked at my lieutenant. I'm like, fuck. We're big brother.
You actually said that to the lieutenant?
Yes.
We're big brother?
Yes.
I mean, what's your lieutenant's reaction at that point in time?
He's still confused. He's still trying to grasp the plot of it.
Yeah.
At which point I decide we're not bothered. He's not actually blocking traffic. Fuck it. Let's go.
Right.
Like, I have water to get to the guys, and like that, this just literally ruined my day.
Yeah. I would imagine it would. Yeah.
Like, I was planning to go to a kegger at BU after that. And instead I'm sitting here like, what the hell are we doing?
Right. So was it like single moment there that you're like, all right, I'm libertarian, or at least freedom loving at this point? Or was it like a little bit of time of like processing?
It was a lot of time of processing. Like, it wasn't even immediate. Like, now granted, the libertarian philosophy and line of thought, at that point in time, I'd spent a lot of free time in college with my roommate was obsessed with Julie Borowski's videos on YouTube.
I mean, who isn't obsessed with her?
Right.
At that time, who was not obsessed with her videos?
This was back in her libertarian girl days before Freedom Works.
Right.
And had me watching a lot of those. And I remember one day a bunch of people at my school, I went to a really weird school in Massachusetts that wasn't a bastion of liberal thought, where a whole bunch of people skipped class one day, and then in the mess hall, this was a military school, in the mess hall, they put Rand Paul's filibuster in the Senate about drone strikes for the whole school to watch, and people sat there for 13 hours and watched it.
Yeah, I haven't watched the whole thing, but I did go back and I watched
highlights.
I watched 7 straight hours of it before I said, he's kind of starting to repeat himself a little bit. Like, he's running out of material.
Right, yeah. But it's like, I guess I was already in a situation to kind of be primed that way.
Right.
And funnily enough, since I've gotten involved in the Libertarian Party, a lot of the people I went to school with, like, all named them, Ryan Shaw, a kid I went to school with at school, never really dove into libertarianism with either. Now he's very involved in the Libertarian Party of Georgia.
Yeah.
Kid John Killian, and we do crazy stuff and get kicked out of bars together. Now his wife is one of the head honchos at Libertarian Party of Florida. It's people who I had fallen apart from after leaving school, and then randomly met up with at libertarian conventions I was invited to. It was like, hey, what the hell?
Yeah,
like,
I've got a couple of those stories as well,
Yeah.
where it's like, as someone who I knew in like 8th grade, and I'm like, wait, I didn't know you were involved in this.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's crazy connections, but I'm not surprised. I'm actually surprised there's less people that I went to school with, given the environment at that particular college and what we were all doing at the time and the time of it when we were all exposed to that media.
Right.
But
so how quickly after this 1984, you see the guy reading 1984, how quickly after that did you start doing libertarian activism? Like, forget the party. Just when did you start? Not even activism, advocacy.
It was about, I would say it's maybe 6 months after that where I made the conscious decision to not re-enlist in the Army.
Okay.
So
pretty easy decision, I assume.
It was one of the hardest decisions in my life and one of the easiest at the same time.
Okay.
Joining the Army and being in the military was something I was born and raised. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. And making that,
I had a very similar mindset.
Yeah, making that conscious decision to not re-enlist, knowing I still had 2 years left on my contract, I was going to finish it out. But that was one of the hardest decisions, just given where I'd come from, but one of the easiest decisions given what we had done and given my experience with it. There was other factors in there too, changes in leadership, changes in structure, the poor environments that I was no longer comfortable being a leader of men in, that I didn't want to be involved in any longer. But the biggest one was kind of a realization that, like, nothing we're doing is legal. Nothing we're doing is constitutional. Nothing we're doing is upholding the oath we took.
Right.
And nothing we're doing is defending people.
Right. It did not prevent a bombing at the most high profile marathon in the country.
Arguably the world.
Yeah, arguably I don't know any bigger ones off the top of my head in the world.
The Boston Marathon is the only marathon in the world that does not qualify for the Olympics.
Because it goes downhill, right?
Uphill. Well, no, there's enough of a change in elevation that it doesn't meet the criteria to qualify for the Olympics.
I mean, okay, for those of you that don't know the route of the Boston Marathon, they basically start you 26 miles outside of Boston, inland, and tell you to run to Boston. Yeah. It's not a circle like a lot of races are. It's a straight line. And so you're starting at, I don't know what the elevation is, but you're going to sea level, so it's not flat.
Yeah, and it's enough of a difference that the International Olympic Committee says it can't qualify for Olympic qualification. The other major, it's the next like 30 by entry size population marathons are all the Olympic qualifiers.
Okay.
And the Boston Marathon is usually the number 1 to 3 each year for entry size, usually up with Chicago and New York.
Right.
And closely followed by London and Berlin.
Okay.
But it's also one of the only non-Olympic qualifiers where you will see Olympic athletes show up.
Right. Okay. So
it's a very high priority race, and most of that's because of the obsessive nature of the city of Boston.
Yeah.
And the people who show up for any kind of sporting event in Boston.
So it's interesting. I haven't met anyone else who's like trigger on the realizing that you're a libertarian was also the Boston Marathon bombing. For me, and I'll make this a lot quicker than Justin's story because I've realized we've been going for quite a few minutes now. For me, I was actually in the Republican Party when the bombing happened. And like a day or two later, I was going to the Ohio College Republicans like conference down at the university. I think it was the University of Miami, Miami, Ohio, obviously, right. not the U down in Florida. Oxford, Ohio is a good time anyway. And as I'm like in the car about to leave to go to this place, I turn on Adam Kokesh's newest video, and he starts talking about a bomb that just went off, and you think like, oh, he's going to talk about the Boston bombing. It's like, well, he mentioned it, but he actually started talking about a bomb that had gone off. I don't remember if it was Iraq or Afghanistan, but it was like 50 people died, And he's like, and you don't care because they're not Americans. And all we're talking about is the Boston bombing. And like at that point in time, I'm looking at the Republicans that I'm in this car with, driving to go to a conference, like our state convention with. And I'm just like, I don't think I'm one of these people anymore. And it was this weird realization throughout the whole week. Like I'm in the hotel and like I'm in the hotel at night and everyone's got the TVs on watching as they're catching these guys. And one of them says, a racial slur about Arabics. And I was just like, I'm not cool with this. like nothing about this, like every sense of nationalism that I had before. And you can say out loud, like, oh yeah, American lives are not more important than people from other places. But if you have any kind of sense of nationalism or anything like that, you don't really believe that 100% of the time. And it was this video that Adam Kokesh put out where he's like, you don't care about these 50 people that died as much as you care about, I think it was only 2 people that died at the Boston, not 3 people that died at the Boston bombing, because they're not Americans. And it was surreal. So
no, it's definitely surreal, but that kind of snap realization isn't something I had. And I'd even go as far as to say I think I was maybe on the path before that. Mm-hmm. This just was kind of a big triggering event. Because in 2012, I voted for Gary Johnson.
Right. Okay.
I was still a registered Republican. But I remember telling my stepdad and my mom, vote for Gary Johnson. They're like, why? I'm like, because Mitt Romney's a dick.
Well, so that was another big leaving point for me was the third debate between Romney and Obama was where I first started to get disillusioned, because if you remember that third debate was about foreign policy, and the two of them basically said the exact same things the whole time, with the one caveat that I'm going to be harder on whatever country they're talking about at that particular moment than my opponent will be. They're just arguing about who's going to kill more people, who's going to cause more bloodshed. And they think that causing this bloodshed is the positive thing that they should be aiming for. I mean,
I think for me there, it was the healthcare debate between the two of them. That's when Obama started first, like pitching the idea of Obamacare and what we're going to do. And a lot of people on the Republican side are like, this is awful. This is terrible. Mitt Romney's like, that's going to bankrupt the country. And I'm sitting here like, all he's fucking doing is repackaging Romney Care from Massachusetts.
Right.
Like 3 years ago, you told us how this was the best thing ever.
Yeah. Totally awesome, guys.
Like, and it was insane to me that Mitt Romney would turn around and attack his own policies when somebody else said them.
Right.
And at that point, I'm like, screw this guy. I'll vote for Gary Johnson. And then I didn't really deep dive into the activism until 2016. And I think it was maybe a real fortunate series. I was working at an insurance startup at the time. Mm-hmm. And as startups off do, this one didn't kind of pan out. And we ended up shutting down. I ended up with a nice little 6-month severance package. And I decided I was going to take at least 4 of that to myself before I started looking for work.
Seems fair.
And in the midst of that, I'm watching the presidential debates. I'm like, Donald Trump's going to win this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
like, this is awful.
I lived in Ohio. I think I was one of the only people who was like, yeah, guys, these polls aren't correct. Like,
I'm like, Donald Trump's going to win this. This is retarded. And then I got something in the mail because I had donated to Gary Johnson in 2012. And so I was on his list. And I ended up getting something in the mail from him. And I'm like, fuck it. And literally the next day, I just started reaching out, couldn't find them online, didn't show up on Google, couldn't find their Facebook. I just went to Twitter and then found a news article about somebody who ran as a libertarian in 2014 in Massachusetts. Stalked her down, found her on Facebook and Twitter, reached out to her. I'm like, what the hell is the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts doing? Mm-hmm. And she said, I don't know. They disappeared on me. There's like 6 of them now. And literally like 2 weeks after me making that snap decision, I'd then been introduced to Dan Fishman and Chris Crawford and the handful of people who were still involved in the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts at the time. And I was mad enough that I argued with them like, this is bullshit. You guys need to be doing something. And here, I'm fun employed. I'll do something.
Right.
And within a few months, they'd appointed me to the vacancy on their state committee, had me organize their next convention. I staged a coup against the state chair, who I thought was driving the party into nothingness, and elected a new state committee. And a year and a half after that, I'm on the national committee.
Yeah, once you get... it's weird how small the world of politics becomes once you start to involve yourself.
Yeah.
It's really weird how small the world is. All right, well, thank you for talking to me, Justin.
No problem.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd want to share?
Don't enlist, kids. Don't enlist.
That's a really good one. I mentioned at one point in time that I had a very similar thought to Justin when it came to the military, and I was very gung ho when I was in high school about going not just into the military, but into one of the military academies. And I got into 12 out of the 13 colleges I applied to, and was waitlisted on that 13th one, which was Carnegie Mellon. Like, I have no doubt that if I had continued to pursue trying to get into the Navy, the Naval Academy, I would have made it. In the Air Force Academy, I would have made it. In the Army Academy, I would have made it. I didn't know which one I wanted to go for, but thank God I tore my ACL senior year of high school.
Again, my path was to try and go into West Point at high school, and I pursued the application all the way up to the point of getting the interview and the final. Like, I'm sitting there with a Senate appointment like on my lap, and my very radically politicized family at the time, my mother was a hardcore Republican, and we were really gunning for one of Dick Cheney's appointments as vice president because he was a Republican.
Right.
And instead, I got a call from Senator Ted Kennedy asking if I could come into his office to talk about the appointment. And I listening to the voicemail with me and my mother. My mother was like, fuck that. He's the worst Kennedy there is. We deleted the voicemail and decided if that was my only way into West Point, I was going to Mass Maritime.
All right. Well, that's a really, really, really petty story. I mean,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for talking to me.
No problem.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of Tales from the Shire. I don't have next week's episode recorded just yet, but if everything goes as planned, it should be around mesh network technology and how many people are getting around using traditional ISPs for greater freedom in their internet use. Thank you all for listening to the Think Liberty Network. You can find us on pretty much all the podcast platforms, all the social media platforms, and as always, at think-liberty.com. See you next week for another episode of Tales from the Shire.